It's time now for French Connections, our weekly look at the intricacies of life here in France with our very own Florence Villeneuve.
Hey, Jeannie.
Hi, Flo. Now, today we're going to focus on the French island of Corsica. Corsica is located in the Mediterranean Sea. It's known as the Island of Beauty, also known as the birthplace of Napoleon Bonaparte. But Corsica has also had a very tumultuous relationship with mainland France since it first became French in the 18th century.
Corsica has been French since 1768, when it was ceded by the Republic of Genoa to the King Louis XV as part of a pledge for debts. But throughout the years, Corsica has really maintained a strong indigenous culture and language, actually closer to Italians. Italians actually ruled Corsica for centuries. Many Corsicans, in fact, feel more allegiance to their flag, the black and white Moor's Head flag, than the national bleu, blanc, rouge tricolor flag. And for many of them actually long for a brief period in Corsica's history when it was actually independent.
Our country is Corsica. Corsica's culture, values, our way of life. It's different from mainland France.
Personally, I feel Corsican. I don't feel French. I feel Corsican because we have our own specific culture and history. I'm sure we'll regain our sovereignty.
Everywhere in France, there are local roots and traditions, but especially here because we're an island, so we preserve them better.
Corsica, of course, is part of greater metropolitan France, and yet it also enjoys a greater degree of autonomy.
Well, Corsica actually has a special status. It's called the Collectivité de Corse, which gives it a lot of autonomy. For instance, the Corsican Assembly is able to exercise limited executive powers. And in 2015, there were regional elections that saw Corsica install its first nationalist government since the 18th century. Essentially, separatists and autonomists joined forces to defeat mainstream parties, and this strategy also worked in recent territorial elections. Nationalists won a historic majority, which actually puts them in a very powerful position to negotiate with the central government.
It's obvious that the final result is a groundswell, a democratic tsunami. Corsica is sending a strong message to Paris and says by a majority we want peace, we want democracy, we want to build an emancipated island.
Now, many people compare what's going on in Corsica to other nationalist movements, for example, in Spain with Catalonia.
Well, there are some similarities, but there are also a lot of differences. For instance, Catalonia is a very wealthy and self-sufficient region, while Corsica depends quite heavily on funds from Paris. And in fact, polls suggest that a majority of Corsica's 330,000 residents actually want the island to remain part of France, but opinions are divided.
There are other regions in Europe and the world that have an autonomous status, and it's fine. Sardinia, for instance.
We'll start with more autonomy. That would be good. And then it should be up to the Corsican people to decide.
Independence? No, we'll never get there. Who will pay our pensions?
Where would we go with independence? All our factories are gone.
In 2 generations, why not? Right now, we're not ready. If nationalists organized a referendum today, it wouldn't pass.
Now, for now, nationalists insist that they're seeking autonomy and not independence, and actually they've issued 3 main demands. First of all, they want the equal recognition of the Corsican language, which is very much a living language, and it's been a regional language since 1974. It's taught in schools, but essentially nationalists want to make it the island's official language alongside French. They also want the recognition of a special residency status for Corsica to actually stop foreigners from buying holiday homes on the island. And finally, you can see it here, they want an amnesty for those in jail considered political prisoners, a category that's actually not recognized on the mainland.
And that's important because the struggle for more autonomy and independence might be more political today, but in the past, it was actually an armed struggle.
Indeed. You can't talk about Corsica's recent history without talking about a group called the FLNC. It's actually our word du jour, our acronym du jour. It's the Front de Libération Nationale Corse, essentially the National Liberation Front of Corsica, a militant separatist group considered a terrorist organization by France. Now, the FLNC fought what they called the French colonizer for several decades. It was a conflict that was marked by bombings, shootings, and their trademark massed press conferences that you can see here. Now, the violence really reached a peak in 1998 when the FLNC, militants from the FLNC, murdered a government-appointed prefect, Claude Erignac. It was considered considered the gravest act of anti-state violence in the nearly 4 decades armed struggle. Now, in 2014, the group actually ceremoniously laid down their arms, but there is still a very strong separatist sentiment in Corsica.
We've been talking a lot about the feeling in Corsica. What's the sentiment like on the mainland? What do French people here think about Corsica?
Well, people on the mainland tend to follow what's happening in Corsica from somewhat of a distance. Just like people in the U.S. can mock people in the South, for instance, people in mainland France sometimes mock Corsicans for being proud and a little bit backwards. A lot of people in the mainland see Corsica as just a wonderful destination for vacation because it really is a beautiful island. L'île de la Beauté, it really, I guess you could say, it deserves that name. It's one of the most beautiful places I've ever been in France. Beautiful beaches, beautiful mountains. There's a unique culture, these beautiful songs, these chants corses, as they're called. There's also, all sorts of delicious regional delicacies, cheese, cured meats, honey, etc. And in many ways, Corsica really survives thanks to its tourism. But this is just a couple of months a year. The rest of the year, the island really relies a lot on state subsidies, meaning that Corsica is actually one of the poorest regions in metropolitan France. And many people in Corsica are tired of that. Now, Paris for years has really had kind of a policy of silence when it comes to Corsica's demands for more autonomy. The question now is, what is President Emmanuel Macron going to do? Is he going to loosen France's grip on the island, or is he going to maintain this very centralized control? We will see in the months to come.
Indeed. Thank you so much for that, Florence Villeminot, and that look at the truly beautiful island of Corsica. If you have any other questions for Flo that you'd like to ask in an upcoming French Connections about anything about France or the French, you can always send her a tweet. Don't forget, @Flo Villeminot.